Please welcome Geoffrey von Maltzahn.
All right, thank you. My name's Jeff. When I first heard that I had an opportunity to speak at this conference, I assumed it was going to be on one of the big MIT auditoriums where I used to take final exams. So I thought I'd be faced with severe PTSD while trying to tell you about what we're doing. I'm grateful not to have to do that. And I wanted to walk you through the story of Indigo. We're about 5 years into this journey, and particularly wanted to frame it around the questions that we've been asking along the way. As most of you are experiencing sort of the outset of a company and through your constant evolution, sometimes it's just a well-posed question where there's a disconnect between, in Joy's case, the laws of physics and what people are doing today or what they believe, or first principles of what they believe. And it's questions that unearth those discrepancies. So at every step, we've been asking various questions, and this is a small sampling of the questions that have been powering the journey we've been undergoing at Indigo. And the first of them was this. So we founded the company out of Flagship Pioneering in 2014, and the premise was that just maybe, with thousands of years of plant evolution in breeding and 100+ years of modern plant biology, we'd overlooked a fundamental aspect of what it means to be a plant. And specifically, if you're a plant, what that means is that you have microbes living inside of every single one of your tissues. Okay, so why is that profound? Well, imagine you're a microbe and you get to pick some place on this slide to live. Where would you want to live? Well, living on a grain of sand is awful. But some microbes do it. So you should Google microbe grain of sand scanning electron microscope, and you'll see like a microbe clinging to sand like El Capitan. But that sucks relative to living inside of a plant. So inside of a plant, you're wet. You're surrounded by sugar and nutrients, and you're protecting for the environment. But there's one big downside, and that's that if that plant dies, you've probably met your maker too. And that's, in fact, why it's profound. So for hundreds of millions of years of modern plant evolution, microbes have been inside all along, seeking to flip light switches to improve their plant's survival to any stress that might compromise its fitness. So we started with a hypothesis that maybe, therefore, every stress in every crop, in every geography in our world of agriculture had solutions embodied in the internal, special, and rare repertoires of microbes that live inside of plants based on Mother Nature's R&D. So in the first couple of weeks, we realized, our first couple of months, that every plant has its own unique microbiome. It's kind of like all of us. We've got a unique fingerprint of microbes that live inside of us. And that means that across the quadrillion seeds that are planted every year in agriculture, every single one of those is a unique microbiome experiment. So instead of building a big strain collection in the lab or taking a scoop of soil and trying to make sense of it, we start with this, which is a portion of a farmer's field that if you were a farmer and you saw this, you'd be devastated by. This happens frequently in agriculture. And you might not even harvest this portion of your field, and you certainly don't really want to be looking at it very often. But if you're looking for incredible microbiomes, this is great. Because effectively, you've got twin plants in a field that would appear to have experienced a uniform stress, but something made that plant special. So we've now sampled tens of thousands of plants like those from around the world. In fact, we've done this on every continent except Antarctica. And every time I say that, I feel like we should just get somebody on a plane to go to Antarctica and do that too. And it's given us a really deep perspective on the tree of life that lives inside of about $1 trillion of agricultural crops. So what we do is we take those plants, we bring them into the lab, we surface sterilize their outside, we sequence the community of microbes, we culture microbes that reside inside of the roots, inside of the leaves, et cetera. And a subset of those microbes are able to causally benefit new seeds when they're placed on the surface of those seeds. So each of these scenarios is in a commercial situation. We experiment with growers that we're now commercially interacting with. And the only difference between an elite commercial variety of seeds is that on the left, they're planted the way they normally would be, and on the right, they're planted with the benefit of one or more microbes that we've discovered from these rare, privileged internal microbiomes of crops. The results of these have been substantial. So these have resulted in 6 to 14% yield improvements in these crops. And for reference, if you're not close to the world of agriculture, which often we aren't when we live in a city, the average rate of yield improvement in these crops every year is about 1% to 1.5%. So depending on the crop, this is like going into the future by 5+ years. The see it to believe it test, which was the essence of why we were doing those experiments I showed on the last slide, was something we heard again and again from growers at the beginning of the company. Like, I need to see it on my farm to believe it. And I had said, all right, well, if we're right about this biology, we should be able to see it from the side of the road. You should be able to see it driving by at 60 miles an hour. And we should be able to see it from outer space. So about 2 years ago, we started testing what was originally a joke, i.e., to see if we could actually see these differences from outer space. And it turns out you can. So we now monitor all of the commercial acres that we're on with satellites and utilize ground truth or data we collect on the ground to be able to infer relationships. And it allows us to be able to monitor the relative performance of all indigo fields relative to control fields that we identified at the beginning of the season. So here you can see the portfolio of about 25,000 acres of indigo fields relative to their controls. The worst case scenario in the indigo portfolio was about the midpoint of what you'd achieve without it. So what that started to lead us to realize was that generating data in your customers' hands is incredibly valuable. And customers, farmers kept saying, well, I won't believe it till it's on my farm. And we realized, all right, well, why is that? Well, they said, I don't believe small plot field trials. So that's a term to describe the typical experiment that's something like between a preclinical experiment or a clinical trial in medicine. And we asked, well, why is that the case? Why don't you believe it? And they said, well, it doesn't translate to my farm. So we said, okay, well, all we have is small plot field trials. What would you recommend we do? And they'd say, you should get another year of small plot field trials because I don't believe the ones you have. And we said, whew, okay, well, you just said you don't believe it, and then you recommended that we generate another year of that data. Something's wrong. So let's imagine we're here in the future, a year from now, and we've got another year of data. Will you believe it? No. Okay, well, let's not do that. And it made us realize that perhaps soup to nuts, the best lab to be discovering agricultural products is, in fact, the farm itself. And that there's a reason for that. One, if you're running an experiment to try to convince your customers of something and they don't derive value from it, then you shouldn't do it for that reason. And two, this experimental paradigm, the small plot field trial, was necessary when it was designed, which was pre-computer, pre-calculator. So when you needed to make your conclusions with a pencil and a sheet of paper, you needed to find the most uniform portion of land that you could, randomize your experiment and your controls, and then draw a conclusion with a pencil. The problem is when you shuffle all of those underlying variables and go to a real world field, the likelihood that whatever you saw in that circumstance is going to translate is low. So it's also of limited predictive value. And so we started embracing what we were hearing from our customers instead of trying to invent around it, and it's been one of the most important things that we've done as a company. So we have partnered with growers, some of the largest and most sophisticated in the United States, to build what we think about as the largest agricultural lab around. And we embed sensors in their field. We characterize the underlying variability of those fields so that you can design much more sophisticated experiments than you would if you were just sort of making judgment calls as to how to experiment here. So each one of these fields produces about 1 trillion data points every day. And it allows us to constantly test our technologies in the hands of our customers. So that experience of realizing how much variability there is across one grower's operations of many fields and across many, many fields in the system of agriculture led us to this question, which was, once we realized that, in fact, there was a ton of variability, much of which consumers would want. So some fields don't use any groundwater. Some fields don't use any chemistry. The greenhouse gas footprints of fields varies dramatically. But all of that gets erased when it's piled like gravel and sort of pushed into the commodity system that exists today. So we started asking, why do we have a commodity system? Why does food inherently need to lend itself to a commodity? And if you're in agriculture, this is such a basic assumption about the way the largest portions of our food system works today that you appear naive or idiotic to be asking it. So we had a period of time where that was the case, and it might still be. But anytime you ask a question, it appears there might be a disconnect between the way people are answering it and their belief system and what the circumstances are today. You should trace why we got to where we are in the first place. And this is how we got here. This is the breakthrough technology that drove the existence of our commodity agricultural system today. And I don't mean the black and white camera, but rather the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine allowed human population to move from rural areas to urban areas and large amounts of food to be produced in rural areas and shipped after being piled together in an elevator system into urban areas. But gosh, I could let this keep playing, but how many people have been on a steam engine? Like, I've been on one, but yeah, not a lot. And it was for fun. It wasn't for necessity. And so a lot has changed since then. And so it's worth taking a step back and saying, well, since we are what we eat, why would we want to be eating a commodity? You literally are a collection of atoms made up of the foods that you ate, which means that you are the atoms that plants on farms around the world were gathering from the air around them and from the soil. And the food that you eat defines a major portion of your impact on the environment and a major portion of your health. So why would we want some bare minimum specification of nutritional quality, of environmental sustainability, of pesticide residue, or of the profitability of the farmers who are producing that food to define the largest portions of our food system? And since technology has changed a lot, we figured it was time for a different system. So our vision is that we can build a digital infrastructure through which you can fully decommoditize the transactions that take place between farmers around the world and the people that are buying their grain. And that this is applicable to small and the very largest portions of our food system. And the centerpiece of this is what we call Indigo Marketplace. So about 2 years ago, we started thinking about this. And we realized that one of the fundamental problems is that when farmers sell their grain and make the most important economic decision they're making in a year, they're doing so with a couple of phone calls. So those phone calls go to potential buyers of their grain, and then they basically determine what the optimal price is and sell. But that's a really challenging way to get the best price, and it's almost an impossible way to say, oh, and no groundwater was used in this field's harvest. Can I get paid a little bit extra for that? By contrast, if there's something like NASDAQ, a digital infrastructure through which farmers can participate in a marketplace and see what the whole market would buy, you can optimize commodity decisions, and the incremental cost to decommoditize a system becomes almost zero. It becomes effectively negligible to annotate every field with all of the management practices underlying the production of that and all of the quality attributes, so that the votes in this room of what we all want our food system to look like can effectively go all the way back to farmers and affect daily decisions that they're making at scale. So what you saw on here was the evolution of onboarding of buyers and growers over the course of the first 15 months of Marketplace. Marketplaces are funny things in that you are literally useless to both parties until both are involved at critical mass. So if you have all growers, you're useless to them until you have buyers and vice versa. So you have to have enough of them both to provide any utility whatsoever. And so this has required a huge amount of effort. This is that same process highlighting the transactions that have taken place in Marketplace over this period of time. This to us is awesome. This is our food system moving into the digital world, we think forever. Whether Indigo is going to be the leader in this, we don't know, but where this is going is inevitable. It feels like 20 years ago, the phone call should have started to be of diminished importance in these transactions. And in the not so distant future, these are all going to be digital. And this is what the the number of bids that have gone through marketplaces looked like over the past 15 months. So I've only shown this one other time in public, and that was at about 50 billion, and I was positive it was going to fall off a cliff right after that. So I also will knock on every piece of wood I've come across on the way home today. But just to give you a sense of what this felt like 4 months in, we'd had about $2 billion flow through marketplace. And that felt enormous and like a Herculean achievement. 4 months later, it was at 10. 4 months later, it was at 50. 4 months after that, it's at 200. So agriculture is an enormous arena. So this is not even close to done, but it feels to us inevitable that we're going to have a digital food system whereby what we want our food system to look like is going to be able to affect farmers in real time. So since the enabling technology for the commodity system was transportation, it felt likely that we would need a new transportation infrastructure for a fully decommoditized system. So we started asking, well, what would that look like? And fortunately, all grain goes by truck at least once. And often that's the trucks of growers themselves or trucks of their neighbors. And those trucks then typically drive to an elevator and sort of put it into the commodity system. But you could digitally connect those trucks such that they could transport grain from a grower with an advantaged set of specifications. Imagine a grower that's growing with no synthetic chemistry and whose overall carbon footprint is negative. They're net sequestering of carbon dioxide. And with a digital system, you could get that to exactly the buyer that's interested in that. So this was an idea a year ago. We started it towards the end of last year. We announced it in February. And thus far, we've booked about 1 billion pounds of grain through this system. And the routes that you see underlying that are the routes that we've run trucks through thus far. Like in our mind, that is the start of a decommoditized agricultural transportation network. And this is the stack of what we think about as our system. We've got 9 different business units now. When you overlay them, this is a more natural means by which to improve the performance of crops. This is marketplace, this is transport, this is a grain quality business. We've expanded into Argentina, Brazil, Australia. We have a joint venture in India and in Europe. Thus far, that's only our microbiome business, but you can tell where this is going to go. Like this is increasingly, we think we have a chance to build a whole new food system, and it's applicable to every geography and to many of the most important crops in the world. So the best of these journeys, it always feels like the beginning, as you've heard from other speakers. And if you think we're done asking questions, then you've kind of missed the point. And I want to leave one in your head, which is that this may feel like the most counterintuitive of the ones that I've described. But just maybe agriculture could be one of our most advanced technologies for reversing climate change. All right, so how could that be? Agriculture is part of the problem. Well, inherently, the only reason that a seedling gets bigger than a seed after it gets wet is that it starts pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. If you drive by a cornfield, everything green, pound for pound, came from a pound of carbon dioxide that was pulled out of the atmosphere. And if we can figure out ways to retain that biomass and get it to stay in soil, and the start of this is a set of practices that people call regenerative agriculture, where by switching to no-till, by increasing the diversity of crops and others, systems can switch from net carbon emitting to net carbon sequestering. We have a chance to be able to make a really big difference. So our vision is to stimulate science and innovation across every one of the world's agricultural regions to try to turn these acres into net sinks for carbon dioxide. And I look forward to letting you know how that goes. So thank you for the time. Pleasure to be here.